Next up, I'd like to introduce Aura Tanner. She is coming to us from the state of Florida. She's an educational technology researcher, and she's going to be talking about her work on data-driven school safety systems in Florida. Over to you, Aura.
Hello, how's everyone doing? Woo! Okay, I'm really excited to be here with you this evening to share with you my project on data-driven school safety initiatives. I bring you greetings from the Sunshine State of Florida, or as many of you know it, the cybersecurity capital of the world, and also the #1 destination where hackers go to retire. But I digress. This topic is very near and dear to my heart. Even though my background is in physics, where I worked in nuclear medicine, I did teach as an 8th grade science educator. So the way that data is used concerning K through 12 children is very important to me. So after the Parkland shootings in February of 2018, legislators across the country kind of reacted by going to technology as a solution for this social issue. And so they started passing all these different laws. In my home state of Florida, they took a really aggressive approach. And so my background, well, one of the things I do in my background is an instructional designer. So I created this video with just an overview of just to give you an idea of what the topic is, the policy that was passed.
The Florida Schools Safety Portal, or FSSP. The Florida Schools Safety Portal is a database that was established as part of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Bill, signed into law in Florida in May 2019. The law included a provision that established a centralized integrated data repository with analytic resources. It is to be used as a tool by threat assessment teams at K through 12 schools to identify students believed to be on the pathway to committing a mass shooting and intervening before they act. To date, there is no evidence-based research to back up a data-driven approach, such as the FSSP, in preventing mass gun violence in schools. So why should you care about the Florida School Safety Portal? Well, for one, the FSSP uses a lot of data to make decisions about students. What data, you ask? Oh, just a few sensitive data points from various sources, including, but not limited to, the Florida Department of Children and Families, Florida Department of Juvenile Justice, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, local law enforcement, Baker Act admissions, social media monitoring data, school environmental safety incident reporting system that collects data on 26 incidents of crime, violence, and disruptive behaviors, and information from Fortify Florida, an application that shows suspicious activity that has been reported. So, what's the big deal? If the FSSP stops the next school shooter, we should use it, right? Well, just how safe will students be if their personal information is at risk? Guardrails for data governance, student privacy, security, and protections against bias within the FSSP system must be put in place. Without these, malicious actors could access the personally identifiable information of over 2.8 million students in Florida's public schools. The FSSP would harm more students than it would help. Remember, keeping students' data safe is a part of school safety. As a community, Florida must hold policymakers accountable for being transparent about how they will ensure both the physical and online safety of students attending the state's public schools.
So that's just an overview. So to recap, there's a huge database that actually is a law. It was passed in May 2019. This database portal went to effect on August 1st, just before we started our school year. And so I have attended some of the School Safety Commission meetings, and since...
Let's make a change. I like to change the fact that I don't know public parks in Los Angeles have artificial...
My DJ for my slide presentation. So some things that have changed since then is that they're no longer referring to it as a centralized integrated database because they realize the limitations that there are on building such a thing and bringing all of the data into one place. And they have concluded that there's nothing new that's been added by trying to bring all of this together. Plus, there were the hurdles of data privacy and security that they had to overcome. So as was mentioned, this is a lot of students across a lot of districts, but what I'm more concerned about is that 55.8% of the students in Florida are African American and Latinx, and it's their data that are in these data sets, so they're the ones that will be disproportionately impacted by this policy. And this is just kind of how it works. Basically, in a nutshell, a student is flagged for some type of behavior that a teacher or someone else deems as could possibly be a threat. And what they envisioned was that these authorized users would go to this database, put in the student's name or birthday or student number, and pull up all this data magically across the student. The threat assessment teams looks at it based, I don't know if it's some rubric, there's been a lack of transparency around that, and they determine how they will intervene with this student or to what degree they believe they are a threat to school safety. So there's several issues. One, it's not evidence-based. There's no research to support using students' administrative data for surveillance and monitoring purposes. Also, there was no community input, so you need to have representation from the communities whose data is being used and who's going to be impacted. The thing I'm interested in, there needs to be a plan how to mitigate bias. So a lot of these data sets, such as Department of Juvenile Justice, Department of Children and Families, are highly correlated with race and socioeconomic status. So there has to be something to mitigate that bias, as well as observation bias from those on the threat assessment teams looking at it. So this is what I decided to do about this policy. These are some of my outputs that I have done. So I'm just gonna jump right in. One of the first things I did was messaging. So I wanted to get publicity about it. I wanted to get education out about it. And I also wanted to build relationships. So I wrote an op-ed in the Tampa Bay Times to talk about the social and technological implications of this policy. I was interviewed for the Washington Tech Policy podcast, where I talked about race and this database that they're looking at doing. Have a peer-reviewed policy brief coming out in a journal along with my fellow cohort homie person, Carissa. There was an episode on NPR On Point out of Boston where they had an episode on student surveillance and wrote an article for CNBC and WSF, which is in Florida. And just last week, I had a student highlight at my university where I'm working on my doctoral degree, University of South Florida, where they also highlighted it. And that's just the op-ed. I also gave a public comment at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission, where I was able to ask them to consider recommendations around accountability, transparency, and fairness in an operational plan. And so they have that, and we're kind of going back and forth on that right now. And that's me. And with my background in instructional design, I've made one-pagers that will be given out to parents and students. And you saw the video explainer. I met with a university class of special education teachers to talk about the implications for special education students. So my next steps are I'm going to shoot for the stars. I'm going to be working with an educational advocacy group. So to use all of these things that are now in a toolkit to get some actions by parents, students, and educators to bring about more transparency. Next week, I will actually be going to get some student insights because we need their voices as a part of this policy-making process. And then I'm just gonna keep pushing for transparency about mitigating the bias on this law. So I'm just looking for as many things as I can do to make sure that the individuals who will be most impacted have a voice in this policy. So if there's any questions.
Hi, my name is Josephine. It's curious because something very similar is happening in France and just got very viral. And it just shut down the program because they made transparent what were the criteria to where they could detect someone. So I'm curious. That's when they just showed up, how discriminatory they were and how biased they were, that everybody shut down was like, this is completely ridiculous. So at what point do they say this student is a problem? What are the signals? What are the criteria?
Well, that's what I'm trying to push for them to reveal, because literally on this law, there's really been little shared with the public. So outside of just knowing the databases that they're using, so obviously someone made a decision. I don't know why they have that power to decide they were using those data points, but they're actually looking at adding even more data sets, even though it's not even fully up and operational. At the last commission meeting, they were looking at using even more data points. But the commission itself is mainly composed of all law enforcement and lawyers, and it's pretty much all white males, so they've been criticized for that. So I'm pushing for them to make public, what is your rubric, what are the decision-making models, what are the criteria? So that's what I'm trying to get to, actually.
Awesome. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Aura.